I'm sure that if you took a look at the world as it is in 2022 and then traveled back in time to 1950 in a time machine, you would see a completely different world. This is a question that has been occupying my thoughts for a considerable amount of time recently. Why do men not approach women as much as they used to? Because in modern times, if you go outside, you won't see it happening nearly as often as in the 1950s, when there was literally no other option but to walk up to a stranger and introduce yourself. I know that a lot of you won't remember this, but there was a time when there were no mobile phones, no internet, and no social media platforms whatsoever. It was nothing at all like what we have now. Back in the day, if you wanted a woman, you either had to physically approach her or go to her father, who had to live nearby, just like in other communities with a similar social structure. Back then, getting a woman required a lot of effort, and women lacked the options they have today to communicate with men from all over the world, comparable to what we have in the modern era. She could only choose from the guys in her community or from the one guy who happened to be passing through her small town at the time and who she ended up falling in love with. Therefore, the times were less complicated back then, and a greater number of men would approach a woman. Because of their inability to communicate with one another, he was unable to say for certain whether or not he would ever see her again. Therefore, he ran the risk of missing out on the woman who would one day become his wife if he did not take the shot. Isn't that crazy? If we look at how things are done in modern times, none of that is required of us. People are more disconnected than they have ever been, to the point where people barely physically speak to other people and men no longer approach women. I believe it is worthwhile to begin a discussion to see where everything went wrong and what this could potentially mean for the future, because almost everybody is connected and is easier to reach. First of all, men already feared rejection and humiliation from women, so for a man to risk getting turned down, made fun of, or labeled a creep and still approach, it means he thinks the outcome is worth it. However, we live in a society where women view the average men that they don't want as predators, creeps, sexual assaulters, and rapists. This makes it more difficult for men to approach women. If that's the case, why would a man want to talk to a woman? So why aren't men going up to women like they used to? One thing you need to realize about men is that before we make a decision, we have to weigh the likelihood of negative outcomes against the potential benefits of pursuing a particular course of action. This is something you need to take into account when relating to men. Consider the manner in which men approach marriage as evidence of this. The majority of men carefully weigh the potential benefits of making that commitment against the potential drawbacks, including what they stand to lose in the event that the marriage does not last. The same thing should be kept in mind when approaching women. Because women have made the process so dangerous and unrewarding, men have come to the conclusion that it is no longer worthwhile for them to go through with it. If the typical man were to approach the typical woman in an appropriate manner with the intention of beginning a conversation with her, the typical woman would more often than not humiliate the typical man. I've seen videos in which a man approaches a woman in an attempt to strike up conversation without appearing to be creepy or disrespectful, but the woman instead manages to make a complete fool of the man. I'm sitting here watching that video and thinking, why in the hell would I want to approach a woman in this day and age? The woman recorded the interaction while spinning the narrative that he was a creep, and she uploaded it to social media for laughs and attention. I'm sitting here thinking about it. To comprehend why something like this is taking place, it is necessary for us to recognize that women respond in a variety of ways to the presence of various men. Now I realize that you might be confused about that, so allow me to break down what exactly this means for you. I want all of you to think about the concept of status and how people's perceptions of value influence how they interact with one another. Consider the instances in your own life in which you were approached by someone who was pleading with you for money, or by a homeless person who appeared to be filthy. You immediately took a defensive stance, choosing not to talk to the person or give them anything in response to their request. The same is true for women, although the situation is significantly worse now than it was a century ago. It is only natural for women to be extra cautious when they are out in the world because they could be taken against their will by a man at any given moment. However, the problem arises when you see a woman out in a public setting with a bunch of people around her, and even though she knows she is safe to some degree, she still publicly humiliates a man just for talking to her. This is where the problem lies. No way Jeff Bezos is a billionaire who is well known and possesses power, authority, and status. A woman of that status would never dare talk down to or humiliate a man who is clearly better than she could ever be. Therefore, as you can see, at the end of the day, everything comes down to a man's status and the value that is perceived by a woman based on how he looks, talks, and approaches the woman. We need to take into account the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, a woman will treat different men differently depending on how she perceives that man, and if she does not see the man as being better than her, then she will treat him like garbage. This is something that we need to take into consideration. If we dig a little deeper, we can only come to the conclusion that contemporary women no longer respect the typical man or men in general. This is because, to return to the point I was making about status, if a woman is notorious for disrespecting the typical and below-average men who approach her, she will have a lower social status. You believe that she would act in the same manner toward Jeff Bezos. On the other hand, if she believes that another man is superior to her, she will treat that man with respect and be more open to the possibility of a romantic relationship with him. Compare the conversation that takes place between a woman and her boss with that of the janitor. Men have seen how women treat other men who look similar to them in comparison to the high-value men, and as a result, men are choosing to completely withdraw from the dating scene. I say all of this to make it clear to you that the contemporary woman no longer respects men, and I believe that the majority of men are aware of this fact and have chosen not to engage in conversation with contemporary women as a result. Men have come to the realization that women's attitudes towards them are only going to get worse and worse, and as a result, they are no longer falling for women's BS. Men are coming to the realization that approaching women results in a negative experience, one in which they put their reputation and possibly even their liberty at risk. Men are saying to hell with that, and I'll be better off not approaching women. Because I don't know if you guys are aware, men have had the police called on them simply because they approached a woman who didn't like them. Men are saying to hell with that, and I'll be better off not approaching women. Therefore, why in the hell would men put themselves through all of that when they stand to gain nothing in return? When you consider that prior to the 90s, women were not this out of order just because a man wanted to talk to them, it's ridiculous that we've arrived at this point in time where men have to evaluate the risks involved in approaching a woman and come to the conclusion that it's too risky and the juice isn't worth the squeeze. This is where we are today. This is the primary reason why I no longer approach XXs. Now that we've covered that point, I think we can all agree that the attitude that modern women have toward men is pretty disgusting. Let's investigate the question of whether or not contemporary women can even be approached in the first place. People will judge you based on their first impression of you, and if you don't appear approachable, they won't even come close to you, let alone talk to you. Today's modern women often give the impression that they have something wedged up their butts as they move about in society. If a woman gives off the impression that she does not want anyone talking to her, particularly a man, then men are less likely to approach her. Therefore, men do not approach these types of women, and when you consider the fact that telling a woman that she must smile is seen as a sign of being a misogynist and a woman hater, you can see why men avoid approaching these types of women. Guys, I know that you have to go through the experience of seeing a woman that you liked, but the way that she made up her face to look like the devil himself made you not want to approach that woman and talk to her. Women in today's modern society have largely abandoned the art of smiling and appearing pleasant in public. This is largely due to the fact that almost all of them walk around with a resting bitch face, which, to be perfectly honest, either terrifies men or turns them off. Therefore, men have made the choice to withdraw and avoid initiating contact with women. Take into consideration this point of view. Would you go up to a man who always seems angry, as if at any moment he might lose his cool and become violent, and try to strike up a conversation with him? There is a good chance that women do not face the same challenges in public and private settings. If a man sees a woman he's interested in and wants to strike up a conversation with, but she gives off the impression that she doesn't want to talk to anyone, he won't want to approach that woman. He will assume that she doesn't want to talk to anyone. However, modern women don't care and aren't willing to change, despite the fact that smiling and having an inviting appearance along with an open body language are extremely important. Similarly, men are not going to approach women, and that will be that. However, when men don't approach, women sulk and complain that men aren't approaching them. Now, ladies, what do you think we should do? Either you are going to send signals to men that you want to be approached, or you are going to harden your exterior, which will cause men to avoid you like the plague. The decision is yours, ladies. Do whatever the hell you want to do. I couldn't care less. The final reason, in my opinion, that men are no longer approaching women is that they'd have come to the conclusion that being in a relationship with a woman isn't even worth it, and as a result, they have decided to give up dating and relationships altogether. Men have been told things such as, "We don't want any scrubs, you're too short. I don't date broke guys, you're ugly, and don't talk to me if you don't have X, Y, and Z." Why on earth would men want to approach and talk to women when they are sick and tired of the situation? Some men are just done with modern women because they cheat on men more frequently, end relationships at a higher rate than they ever have, and treat men more and more poorly as time goes on. Some men have made the decision to say something to the effect of, "You stay over there and only treat Chad and Tyrone good, while I'll be going my own way, not dealing with the poor treatment from modern women." So, at this point in time, this is where we are. Because men are not getting into relationships, making romantic overtures to women is pointless. Men are starting to come to their senses thanks to male-centric spaces, like this YouTube channel, that educate them on how to better understand women. They are not going to devote their entire lives to the pursuit of women tranquilly. A growing number of men are coming to the conclusion that the game is rigged. Women are only going to get worse, so we'll just stay right where we are to protect our tranquility and independence from females and the negative behavior they exhibit. We don't need a girlfriend, we don't need a wife. and we don't even need to talk to women anymore because that's not how things are going to work going forward. There is no longer any advantage to dating and marrying, and as a result, our men have stopped approaching women simply because we no longer care about approaching women. This should help alleviate the problem. Going forward, everything is going to be handled in this manner. I will pass judgment on any of you men who are still interested in having romantic partnerships. If you still want to date, that's fine with me and more power to you. You should be aware that by engaging in this behavior, you are putting yourself in jeopardy of being arrested, humiliated, and disrespected in public, and falsely accused of something that you have not committed. As long as you are aware of the potential consequences and you still choose to engage in the activity, then it's on you alone. One thing that can be added to this discussion is the fact that men now have alternative options, such as paying directly for a woman to leave after she has her 10 toes up, using sugar daddy websites like Seeking, and online dating platforms like Tinder. Because of this, it is no longer necessary to approach a random woman. Why would I put myself through the embarrassment of being rejected in public when I could just pay a woman to sleep with me? Makes no sense to me. What I really want at the end of the day is for her legs to be draped over my shoulders, so why in the hell would I waste my time talking to women? You get what I'm saying? This is the reason why men are not approaching women as much as they used to, because we do not need to approach them in order to get what we want.